Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us again on the Best of the West Book Club, where Dr. Robollard and I take you through some neglected classics of the Western tradition, addressing the crisis of our times. Dr. Robollard, thank you for joining me again.
Yeah, glad to be here as always. Good to see everybody.
Looking forward to it. So, we're looking at Jolivera's Revolution and Counter-Revolution. Today is chapters 7 to 9, thinking about his full analysis of the revolution as the attack on order. Before we get into some of his important insights, please lead us in the weekly prayer.
In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, divine creator, true source of light and fountain of wisdom. Pour forth your brilliance upon my dense intellect. Dissipate the darkness which covers me, that of sin and of ignorance. Grant me a penetrating mind to understand, a retentive memory, method and ease in learning, lucidity to comprehend, and abundant grace in expressing myself. Guide the beginning of my work, direct its progress, and bring it to successful completion. This I ask through Jesus Christ, true God and true man, living and reigning with you and the Father forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. So, recapping on the previous lessons, then, chapters 1 to 6, let's just begin with the observation that two notions conceived as metaphysical values express well the spirit of the revolution: absolute equality, complete liberty.
Mm.
And there are two passions that most serve it: pride and sensuality. So, this is what we really need people to bear in mind as the takeaway point from chapters 1 to 6. We've got absolute equality and complete liberty as the metaphysical values, and then pride and sensuality as the two passions that serve the revolution.
Mm.
What makes this a fair summary of the book so far, Mike?
Well, I think this is, it connects up with how it is that the elements within the character and soul of the individual and the body and the holomorphic union of the body, mind, and soul of the individual in aggregate build up to macroscopic social behaviors. So if you have a small um, or a singular set of persons that are prideful, that they want pure equality with God or with authority, and they're striving towards that pure equality, and they want liberty and liberalism in all uh, appetites and all satisfaction of the passions. Then you build that up to the macroscopic social level. Then it's going to take the form of social movements in a revolutionary trajectory towards absolute equality and absolute liberalism.
Yeah, thinking about the importance of the family here in particular and how it was attacked largely through the weaponization of sensuality, especially
Mm.
lust and sex outside the family. That teaching of the church that the family is the original social cell. If things start going wrong there and we get egalitarianism as an assault on domestic hierarchy, the authority of the father,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
reminds me of what we were talking about in previous lessons about this being an attack on God the Father with the capital F, the Pope
Mm-hmm.
as well as Papa,
Yep.
patriarchy, papacy, and then the domestic church as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, certainly. Yep.
So this is similar to Plato's concept that the city is the soul writ large. And what you've just outlined there is a pretty controversial concept for many of the talking heads in the media, wondering about what's going wrong with the West politically, because you're saying it's fundamentally spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly. The talking heads, even on the conservative ink side of things, still tend to frame the situation in terms of secular economic theories, or some account of various, like Reaganism or libertarianism or something, as your solution to all of this. But as we've been seeing, the arc through everything we've been reading, but particularly this book, the fault lines, the crack in the dam of Western man has happened centuries prior to whatever the wokeism getting into the universities in the 70s or something like that. So we really need to go back to assess this from a theological and spiritual point of view, and not just 20th century conservative economic theories.
Yeah, exactly. People hilariously will sometimes define a trad as someone who wants to wind the clock back to the 1950s and the kind of sexual mores that were current then. But no, this goes way before the 1950s. And even then, you've got the most important rot setting in, which is the idea that we don't need the social kingship of Christ, and
Mm.
that there's this really strict demarcation, separation between church and state, and religion is something dirty that you do behind closed doors.
Yeah, that it's impolite. That it's an impolite thing to or topic to bring up in normal public conversations.
Right. Because
That
it attacks these two things, pride and sensuality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's going to bother people that want to indulge those things. Nobody wants a narc at their sex and drugs party.
So the way in which pride and egalitarianism is linked then is outlined in great detail. And I think it'd be worth giving an overview of this so that people can see the extent of his analysis, because it's a really important insight. So we begin with equality between men and God. And he notes here that pantheism, immanentism, and all esoteric forms of religion aim to place God and men on an equal footing and to
Mm.
invest the latter with divine properties. And I don't know if you've noticed, but various kinds of pagan religions and Satanism itself are
Mm.
actually on the rise now. It caught my eye because most people know that I've been trying to popularize J.D. Unwin's work, Sex and Culture. And
Mm.
Unwin said that when you get a relaxation of sexual restrictions, you get a falling away from rationality. And one of the resurgences that he predicted is witchcraft. So more and more women are now identifying as being witches. And
Mm.
we've got all sorts of various pagan religions as well alongside that.
Yeah. I would say the entirety of the New Age movement, so to speak, is whether or not they explicitly realize it, they're still acting out some type of pagan or neo-pagan, Gaia worship or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, who needs a church? Who needs anyone telling you what to do? You're the God.
Yeah, yeah, it's certainly a lot more permissive that way.
He also says that an atheist is an egalitarian who, to avoid the absurdity of affirming that man is God, confirms the absurdity of declaring that God does not exist. Secularism is a form of atheism and therefore of egalitarianism.
Mm.
Now, this is one of those aspects of the revolution that is really like the water the fish swims in and therefore doesn't notice,
Yes,
because
yeah,
most people wouldn't think of themselves as being egalitarians in that respect, but no, they are.
yeah. They're just along for the ride of the the trajectory of the way the revolution's going. They might not be explicitly for it, but they're de facto not against it, so they just go along with it. Yeah.
And de Oliveira describes them as people acting like a person who has dethroned God. So living your life in the temporal realm as if God does not exist.
Mm.
So that's the first form of egalitarianism that pride results in. Really the root one. So not wanting to be subject to God's commands. Now, the next one that we touched on last time, actually, thinking about the Reformation in particular, he says is equality in the ecclesiastical realm, mainly the
Mm.
suppression of a priesthood endowed with the power of orders, or at least of a priesthood with hierarchical degrees. So, in a sense, what the Reformation said is that all shall be priests. You can all read the Bible in the vernacular, and
Hmm.
nobody is better than anybody else at interpreting it.
Yeah, and yeah, it's you can see this this starts to become the germ of a kind of epistemic relativism that is going to take us to trans later on, but it begins here actually.
Say a bit more about that. I think that's important.
So yeah, if there is this divorcing from an actual authoritative interpretation of scripture, and one can see their own truth or read their own truth uh, purely sola scriptura in the theological sense, then in the secular version of that, we're going to see that um, take on various forms of liberalism, and then taken to a even more extreme extent. We're now at a point where with trans that people can just declare that they are a particular thing, they are a particular biological category, and by that account, that they're supposed to be that thing in all respects. And so you can see this um, further and further falling away from any fixed reference point, any authoritative or like anchoring to objective truth.
Yeah, I think that's a good parallel. And amusingly, you've now got calls from within the Anglican Church not to refer to God using masculine pronouns, which is funny because they're not calling him by the pronouns that he told us to use.
They're not.
So,
Yeah. Why don't they respect God? God's self-identification. That ought to matter, right?
yeah, I mean, if anyone's is going to, you'd think it would be
Yeah.
his. Um, Now, just remind me of what you're saying there with the trans, because you've actually got there in the principle of private judgment interpretation of scripture. You've got people saying, "Well, no, I think God's actually a woman. We should use female pronouns." And fine, according to them, there's nothing binding how they should interpret the
Mm.
Bible.
Yep. Yep.
Good insight. Next one is equality among the different religions. All religious discrimination is to be disdained because it violates the fundamental equality of men. And I think you were hinting at this already with it being a opening of the door to relativism ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
because look, if all these different contradictory interpretations of scripture are okay, then why not just have all these contradictory religions being okay as well? So why do we care so much about equality among the different religions if we are proud then? Jolivera says that to claim that only one religion is true to the exclusion of others amounts to affirming superiority, contradicting evangelical meekness, and acting impolitically, since it closes the hearts of men against it. But the Catholic Church says it is the one true church and it's infallible. So that's got to make people seethe, hasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's completely contrary to the radical theological pluralism that is pervasive in secular culture, and yeah, it's almost inverted at this point, where it's like you're allowed to be almost any assertive religion that brings in all sorts of deep theological metaphysical commitments, but you gotta tamp down on speaking up or speaking your mind if you happen to be Christian, especially if you're Catholic, because yeah, that's that's judgmental. That's you wouldn't want to remind people that there's some external authority.
Yeah. exactly. The truth that you don't get to decide,
Mm.
because Jesus said that he's the way, the truth, and the life. He didn't say, you do your truth or you do your own way.
Yeah, yeah, I don't recall reading that anywhere. Um, but that just reminded me that that C.S. Lewis quote where he has in God and the Dog where he says Christianity it's one of two things. It's either something to be taken deadly seriously or not seriously at all. But it's not something you take halfway seriously. It's just not the kind of thing that that is just like a preference.
Yep.
I mean, it's not like your favorite ice cream flavor. It's like
The
this is
stakes
truth
are high.
incarnate. Yeah,
Yeah.
this yeah, the stakes are high. Exactly. Yeah.
Stakes are high, and God and the devil are playing for keeps. Okay,
Yeah.
so
So.
we've got quick recap then of how pride leads to the desire for equality between men and God, which, as Aquinas explained to us, is fundamentally satanic because it was the fact that the devil couldn't bear his place in the hierarchy of creation that led to his rebellion. So pride and envy are the two demonic sins of the seven deadly ones, because all the other five involve needing a body. They've got a fleshly component, but pride
Mm.
and envy are purely demonic. We've also got the drive towards equality in the ecclesiastical realm. We're too proud to have priests, and we can even end up just being a church of one, basically, just
Mm.
ourselves and scripture, nothing else needed, no intermediaries at all. And this ends in like the Unitarians, for example, even denying the divinity of Christ because
Mm.
the Trinity is mysterious to them and an affront to their sense of pride in not being able to fully rationally grasp everything. So that has to go. Then
Mm.
we've got equality among different religions because one claiming the truth is an affront to pride as well. Now we've got equality in the political realm too, which is one of the ways in which even non religious people can sense what De Oliveira is talking about, which is when we get the elimination or at least the lessening of the inequality between the rulers and the ruled. Power
Mm.
comes not from God, but from the masses. They command, and the government must obey. Monarchy and
Mm.
aristocracy are to be proscribed as intrinsically evil regimes because they are anti egalitarian. Only democracy is legitimate, just, and evangelical. So, monarchy and aristocracy, then. This should remind us of what he said about the French Revolution.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. This is the secular version of overthrowing the father. So now we're rather than rebelling against the Pope, we're rebelling against the authority of the king and trying to bootstrap a new social order out of I guess whoever can manage it violently as it was in the case with the French Revolution. So, but that's what we see there.
Whether it is possible to have any kind of society without authority, they think it is. We think it's not. And history would suggest that it's not. There's no
Mm-hmm.
society possible without authority. So this is a delusion,
Yeah.
which is why the call for liberty has led to tyranny in the long run, whenever it's been
Mm-hmm.
tried. Then we've got equality in the structure of society. So the suppression of classes, especially those perpetuated by heredity, and also trying to eliminate aristocratic influence. So we've got a flattening of culture and customs, according to De
Mm-hmm.
Oliveira. So, like, think of manners, for example, or
Mm-hmm.
dress. We have to level it all.
We have to level it all, and it's if we see the Whig interpretation of history as being the standard by which we're good people or we're a good society, then yeah, the more leveling, the more giving the power and the social status to the have-nots and disassembling and taking down the evil hierarchical structures of old, then the better we are. That's the narrative that keeps repeating each generation.
Yeah, the way this relates to pride is that it's painful to be told that there's a standard that you have to meet and you're currently not good enough for. It's a bit like being told that there is a true religion and you are in error if you don't conform to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, for a young man, for example, to be told that here is the way a real man should live to fulfill masculinity according to natural law. Here are the standards that you have to meet. Here are good ways to behave. Some people are too proud to accept that. They think that whatever they happen to come up with as their own version of being a man, whether it's just playing video games all day, smoking weed, masturbating, watching porn, whatever it might be. I mean, it's all fine, isn't it? It's just as good as anything tradition might suggest.
Just as good or even better, right? It's an improvement. We're each generation is improving upon the wisdom of and the accumulated learning points and errors of the old, and bringing us to the omega point of pregnant men. and, yeah, or maybe we're not really improving as much as we thought.
Yeah, they'll say things like, "Look, I'm being more authentic. I'm being more me
Mm,
when I do my video
right.
games."
Yes. Yes. I think that's a huge thing that is either absorbed by a lot of folks these days, or something that they come to, as their own excuse making, or maybe some combination of both. But yeah, the idea of I'm just being my true self
Yep.
somehow ends up being the carte blanche, or the sort of the trump card that you can just throw down and say, well, that's my reasoning, that's my justification.
Yeah. It's just me. I'm just being me, okay?
Mm.
So this is where we get the pride aspect, because it is a refusal to submit to any kind of standard that you didn't make yourself. So that's the pride.
Reminds me, there's a book that came out a couple of years ago called the subtle art of not giving a f. And
Yeah.
it's like, I can't think of, like, just like a more, I don't know, just like a call to just, just do whatever, just you do you, just YOLO, just
Yep.
nothing matters, just what, as long as you're doing you, don't give a f about anything. It's like, that seems like a fitting book for the cultural moment.
Yeah, definitely. And related to pride as well is the abolition of the intermediate bodies between the individual and the state. And remember, this was one of Rousseau's big goals. So everything between the individual and the state had to be eliminated for him, like the guilds and corporations, for example.
Yeah.
And chief among these intermediate bodies is actually the family. And Jolivera rightly points out that among the intermediate groups to be abolished, the family ranks first. Until it manages to wipe it out, the revolution tries to lower it, mutilate it, and vilify it in every
Mm.
way.
Almost as if there's a coordinated attack. Almost as if this is a satanic attack upon the social cell of humanity. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Now, if you don't agree with Catholic social teaching that the family is the original social cell, just pause to think about the fact that the revolutionaries do. They understand
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
100%. They're in agreement with Catholic social teaching on that, as on many other things, because they know what the truth is and that's the thing to attack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would think if they were, like, really, really true to their sticking to their guns, and they thought everything was just completely arbitrary, then, like, it seems odd that then they would just focus all their efforts on these particular targets. Like, well, why not just roll a dice, or use a magic 8 ball to like decide who your enemies are?
Exactly. So, as we've mentioned before, it's is a backhanded compliment and also an indicator of the truth claims of the church that it's taken so seriously by its enemies, and they
Mhm.
focus all their firepower on exactly the areas that the church says matter most. Now, in addition to pride leading to the abolition of intermediate bodies, we've got economic equality as well. So no one really owns anything, everything belongs to the collectivity. This is a slogan, isn't it? You'll own nothing and be happy.
Yes, yeah, yeah. That's I hadn't thought of that when I read this, but yeah, that's correct.
Played out exactly as he said it would. And then we've got equality in the exterior aspects of existence. Variety easily leads to inequality of status. So we have to reduce variety in dress, housing, furniture, habits, and so on as much as possible. And then equality of souls comes in as well. And I
Mm.
liked his phrase that propaganda standardizes all souls, taking away their peculiarities and almost their own life. And here's where I think people should really notice how acute this analysis is, despite being decades old for what's happening right now. Even the psychological and attitudinal differences between the sexes tend to diminish as much as possible. Now, isn't that a great description of the way in which there's a flattening of male and female as well? So, a
Mm.
healthy culture will accentuate the differences
Right.
between men and women, and
Hmm.
the fact that having a male body, a female body, is a calling to a particular social role.
Hmm. Hmm.
If we're flattening all that, then what's a woman? What's a man? It's just like a mush.
It's a mush in terms of spiritual and physical comportment, as well as mental and linguistic categories. That these things are they're all tracking very similarly together. So you see this, the degradation of language will track very closely to the degradation and like the mushing, muddling of form, the physical form as well.
Yeah, right. It's like it reminds me of Macbeth when they meet the witches out on the heath, and Banquo is looking at them, and he's saying, "Are you men? Are you women? You've got beards. I'm not sure what
Mm.
you are." And the witches have talked about how fair is foul and foul is fair, and they're jumbling up all these categories. And it's the exact kind of sense in which evil flattens out and destroys order and hierarchy because they can't place them. Men, women, living, dead. Are they from Earth? Are they not
Yeah,
from
yeah.
Earth? That's what
Hmm.
modern men and
Hmm.
women are like. It's just a flattening of everything down to the level of, I guess, like boys almost. I think that's where I'd put it
I
most of
was
all.
Yeah, I was gonna say like eunuchs or something. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
asexual drones.
yeah. I'm thinking of. We talked about this before. I think on Seamask, the feminism is men and women both behaving like little boys, like the lowest common denominator. So that's what Jolavera is pointing
Mhm.
out here. I think. Then we
Yeah.
also have alongside that equality in social relations. This reminds me of Plato with grown-ups and youngsters, no real difference. Teachers and students, no real difference. Husband and
Hmm.
wife,
Hmm.
no difference. Parents and children just becoming basically friends. So
Yeah,
authority goes in all of
parenting.
those.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and
Parenting.
then yep. And I was just thinking, yeah, even with your within the military, right? Like there used to be rigid distinctions between the officer class and your non-commissioned officers, your enlisted, and I mean particularly in like the British Navy. But
Mm,
um, like yeah, now it's getting much more leveled as well.
interesting. Thinking about how it works top down. The military, along with the elite schools and universities, that's one of the means of cultural production,
Hmm.
according to
Hmm.
Gramsci's theory. So it's one of the things you'd want to take over for sure, as quickly as possible. If you were one of the radicals, the military would be up there.
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely.
Make it as gay and feminist as possible.
Yeah. that's that would be the way to do it.
Parenting, I think, was a really important point people to bear in mind there, because it's an attack on the authority of the father, which is why divorce goes alongside with all this as well.
Mm,
Institution of divorce as part of the French Revolution was a big move on the part of the radicals, and a really effective one.
mm,
We've also got the move towards globalism, because being fundamentally egalitarian, the revolution, says de Oliveira, dreams of merging all races, all peoples, and all states into one, like a super state.
mm,
So globalism has as a world vision the imposition of egalitarianism everywhere.
mm. Yeah, this is John Lennon's Imagine once again. Yeah, it's all distinctions. No, imagine there were no countries, so you have no partiality, no home. Right,
Yep.
everywhere's your home. No, nowhere's your home. Everyone's your friend. Everyone's your neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that applies to different parts of the same country as well. So there's no concept of wholesome regionalism, de Oliveira says,
Mm,
political or cultural, within countries. So not just between different countries, but sameness within the same country as well. So think of different states in the US or different counties in the UK.
mm.
The local distinct atmosphere and customs, none of that has any value. In fact, it's a bad thing. We need to get rid of it, the traditional
Yes.
ways of life.
Yep. Yep.
All right, this pretty much completes his rundown of the ways in which pride and egalitarianism are linked. And he just finishes with a couple of observations about how Aquinas teaches that the diversity of creatures and their hierarchical gradation are good in themselves, for thus the perfections of the
Mm,
Creator shine more resplendently throughout creation. Providence instituted inequality among the angels, as well as among men, both in the terrestrial paradise and in this land of exile. Why? A universe of equal creatures would be a world in which the resemblance between creatures and the creator would have been eliminated as much as
mm,
possible. That's a really interesting point. So Christianity is hierarchical all the way through,
mm.
even right up into heaven. So there's hierarchy in heaven.
Yep. Yeah. How could there not be with the creator and creations? Right there, there's a hierarchical distinction.
Yeah. So it's a hatred of God fundamentally. And then Jolavera says that to hate in principle all inequality is to place oneself metaphysically against the best elements of resemblance between the creator and creation. It is to hate God. Just let that sink in. To hate in principle all inequality is to hate God.
But I thought being a good person is we're trying to get rid of inequality, right? We're trying to promote equality. That's what being a good person is. Don't you care about social justice? Don't you care about inequality? That's being a good person is finding inequality and then erasing it. I guess in general, that's the mainstream narrative, isn't it?
Right? That's how the slogans work, because they have a grain of truth in them. And he's quick to point out that we're not concluding that inequality is always and necessarily a good. So all men are equal by nature and different only in their accidents. Could you explain to people a bit about what that means? All men are equal by nature and different only in their accidents.
So in the nature of man, the kind that man is, we all are equal in our intellect and will and in our basic dignity and worth in God's eyes. But then, in terms of like the contingent accidents that make us uniquely us, we're going to see a gradation and a difference in terms of individuals and over different peoples, different regions. And those accidents are what make us distinct. But fundamentally, our essence is still equal, and our souls are still equal in God's eyes.
Right.
So the problem that the syllogism that the liberal or the secular left has to deal with is the following: it's if there's differences in people in their accidents, therefore there's differences in their basic dignity. There are differences in people's accidents, therefore there's basic differences in their basic dignity. And rather than just denying the the first claim, they try to deny the second one, saying no, everybody is equal. So it's no, just deny that connection, right? There can be differences in accidents, but we nonetheless still have equal dignity. Just do that, right? But
Yep.
because they lack a theological account of things, they have no metaphysical grounding or in that view, then they have to try to mash everything and go, no, these records are wrong. You're a bad person, you're a bigot, you're,
Yeah.
etc. So that's the syllogism that they're stuck with.
Exactly right. Which is why they are terrified of the possibility of a connection between IQ and genetics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are the trusted science people too.
Yep. So just to recap on what you've explained really well there, people have different talents. Some people are more beautiful than others physically. Some are more virtuous than others. Some people are born with great gifts of strength or speed or musical ability. Maybe once a 1,000 years or whatever, you get somebody with an intellect like Aristotle or Aquinas or Plato.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're not more valuable as a human being. They share the same human nature, but in their accidents, they happen to have something which is a great gift. And the hierarchy resulting from that is just.
Yep. Yeah. That's how God formed these folks. Yeah.
Right. Now, that's a helpful overview of a lot of the themes that he's touched on in the first 7 chapters about the way in which pride is at the root of egalitarianism and how it plays out in so many different spheres of society and the church as well, and how it all comes back to that fundamental disorder. It's the worst of the 7 deadly sins for a reason. And then we'll go through this one more briefly so we can get on to some of our quotes we want to look at. But sensuality and liberalism has the same kind of connection. So we're thinking about the principles of equality and liberty. And sensuality is the cause of liberalism, according to Jolivera, which is why what you see is in the sexual revolution, it was the spearhead of political liberalism. So sexual liberalism is the spearhead of political liberalism. E. Michael Jones's
Mm-hmm.
book on libido dominandi essentially says that this is how they got men in particular by the balls. So the emasculation came through sensuality. So what do we get? The hierarchy in the soul should be that the intelligence guides the will. So your rationality governs your sensibility. We're already weak here because of original sin. So we're inclined to disorder. This is what the doctrine of concupiscence involves, especially sexually. And liberalism basically puts the will above intellect. So whatever you happen to will, whatever you want, that's what we care about most. That's the supreme good, just willing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is, I guess, in the political formulation of this is a pursuit of one's own happiness. This is some version of Millian contractualism, where you're free to go off and do your own thing as long as it's not hurting anybody else. With sort of no concept of the telos or a purposefully ordered intellect and will. What that looks like.
So the correct hierarchy within the soul is subverted by placing will above intellect. We've also got egalitarianism in the soul. Remember that, according to Jolivera, the revolutionary process is all about achieving a general leveling. And once that is transposed to the relations among the powers of the soul, he says, we get tyranny of the unrestrained passions over a weak and ruined will and a darkened intelligence, which is very much what Plato described as well, isn't it?
So Plato described, it's why we keep stressing this in our opening prayer, that sin makes you dumb, and this is another re-articulation of that point.
It's an important thing to bear in mind about the metaphysical anthropology. What is a human being? Because according to liberalism, there's basically nothing wrong with us. We're perfectible, and they believe that in principle, heaven on earth can be created. Like, what's holding us back from the bright, shining society of the future, as Bertrand Russell put it? Some kind of unjust social order that we can fix with our intellects, which aren't darkened whatsoever, and then we can achieve with our wills, which aren't disordered whatsoever. So why wouldn't
Right.
we be able to do that? And why would we need God to help us?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Now, remember that the most bloodless political philosophies, the ones that have believed that most wholeheartedly, have always turned out to produce the bloodiest realities. And Chesterton quipped that original sin is the only Christian doctrine that can really be proved just by looking around in the street.
Yeah, I think most people don't realize how vicious they can become, or how animalistic they can become when they're hungry. Like how just missing a couple meals, or just having just a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of pressure put on you, can really bring out a nastiness that you might not know that you had, just by restricting food. So yeah, I think a lot of these folks that think we're just a couple more restrictions, a couple more utopian rules away from heaven on earth, don't themselves realize just how the darkness in them that might be there.
Right. This, by the way, is one of the reasons why I'm not a Muslim, even though I respect a lot of what Islam teaches and it aligns with Christianity on many things. And Pope Pius X's catechism pre Vatican II said that Christians and Muslims worship the same God, the one true God. Like, it's monotheism, right? So how could it not be? They get things
Mm-hmm.
wrong about him, but at least they got that big thing right, like the Jews. The only
Right.
three world religions that say there's one God.
Mm-hmm.
So the Islam teaches that we've just forgotten things, and if we could just fix our knowledge, then that's enough. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
Christianity says not only is there something wrong with us intellectually, but there's something wrong with our willpower as well. So you might know all kinds of things. Maybe you're super smart and you can read every page of Aristotle and Aquinas and take it all in. But just knowing that isn't going to actually heal your
Mm.
disordered tendency towards willing the wrong things. So it's not just a matter of knowledge, it's also about will too.
Right. Right.
So we get recap on that. Hierarchy in the soul is assaulted. We get egalitarianism in the soul instead. And really, what the revolution means in practice is the free course of the worst passions and the most pernicious errors. And then, summing up, he says that this inversion, right to think, feel, and do everything the unrestrained passions demand, is the essence of liberalism. This is clearly shown in the most exacerbated forms of the liberal doctrine. On analysing them, one perceives that liberalism is not interested in freedom for what is good, it is solely interested in freedom for evil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are we liberating from exactly, if not some some point of reference that is either true or good. Well, like the idea of liberation, it seems like a negative concept, right? It seems like it needs a reference point to something else. It's like a Cambridge property. It's not a property unto itself. It's like to the left of, to the right of. So there's a hint of like liberation from what exactly? I guess yeah, good, the true.
This is why I think things like abortion, for example, become so symbolic to them. So if you're not free to have abortions, like you're not really free at all.
Right. Yeah. 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 It reminds me of Timothy Leary when he was trying to get LSD to trend in the early 50s
Uh,
or late 50s. The youth wouldn't accept it. They're like, I don't want to do this. But then they rebranded it as like, no, the adults they're preventing you from this freedom that you have to take acid and tune out and whatever, drop in, drop out, turn off. And as soon as they repackaged it as this essential freedom that was being denied to them, they flocked to it. So yeah, the abortion can be repackaged in the same manner. You can take something that's really like just heinous and and self-destructive and other destructive and repackage it as, no, this freedom is being denied to you. Don't you want to? Do you want to do this? It's your right. It's your right to chop your arms off. Being prevented to do that. Now you can make that trend.
yeah, and that was the devil's line of attack against Eve and Eden, wasn't it? Like, you really want to be confined? You can't have this one fruit from this one tree? Isn't that a restriction of your liberty? Come on.
Mm-hmm.
Just think. You'll
Yeah.
have knowledge of good and evil and be as gods. So, pride again, exactly like he's describing. So, we've had a look at the broad outlines of how this works, the detailed analysis of some of the concepts that he's introduced in the first 6 chapters. We've seen how it plays out in society and also within the soul as well. And now we want to have a look at a few of the other quotes that we selected as being especially important. So the revolution, in his view, is really about destroying a legitimate order and replacing it with an illegitimate power or state of things. He says he deliberately doesn't say an illegitimate order of things because it's not really an order. This is one of the mistakes people make. So you just get order or chaos. And this quote here, I think, really drives that home. Medieval Christendom was the only authentic order among men. Now, this is the thing that's most under attack. This is the object that the revolution wants to destroy. But it hasn't got an alternative order. We just get chaos instead because this is the only way of actually doing it.
Yeah, that's why you see all of these ad hoc placeholders for that that try to speak some new political regime into existence just based upon, I don't know, just arbitrary rules. Liberty, equality, equality, fraternity. I don't know. Let's bolt those together and try to start a social order with that. Let's not consider how they all hang together, and we'll just run with it.
Right.
Diversity is our strength. Let's bolt together every conceivable faction that's not Christian, and see if we can make society work that way, not considering any of the inherent contradictions.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try that. Why not?
Same thing with sex as well. Coming back to the family as the original social cell, Aquinas says that human nature rebels against the promiscuous union of the sexes. So you don't have the option of promiscuity as the foundation for society. That doesn't work. Natural law won't allow it because we don't decide what our own nature is or what works for it. So what this quotation is really saying is that you have authentically Christian civilization, which works, and then you have lots of things that don't work. You can get things right according to natural law and not be Christian, but you're still just consistent with the truth of Christianity. And this is the only way in which it flourishes fully. And he pushes quite hard the fact that this is what we need to return to. So, what is the goal of the counter revolutionary? To restore and promote Catholic culture and civilization. Part of what we're trying to do with this book club series and also with CMASC as well. And it's worked every time it's been tried in the past before and has led to the greatest flowerings of Western culture. So people need to understand that this isn't some crazy untried idea. It's just a return to living according to God's rules, which lead to the flourishing of human individuals and human societies at large.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this means acknowledging that society and the state have a sacral purpose. This is the integralism question. I wrote an article on this for Chronicles a while ago. And essentially, this is just saying that the state is subordinate to the church, distinct from, but subordinate to, because we only have like one final end, which is God. When you die, what you've done with your career, for example, it doesn't really count in the final analysis when you are judged. So all your temporal pursuits, if they don't help you get to heaven, then they're ultimately damaging you. They're more than irrelevant. They're actually damaging you if they prevent you attaining what your true final end is. So the goal of the state is to help citizens live in the light of the fact that this is the final cause or the telos of human existence. Spiritual is more important than merely temporal.
Mm-hmm.
What have we got so wrong then? Because that is not the way that the state functions now.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know where where exactly to diagnose where things went wrong. But yeah, it seems to be the complete opposite now. It seems to be that the state is, I don't know, using instruments of the state, like the FBI, to target Catholics and Christians and to prevent them from living virtuous lives or promoting ideas to others about how to live virtuous lives. So yeah, it's become completely pernicious and corrupt at this point, or almost completely, except for certain pockets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even more than that, which is all true, you get the state supplanting the church, so setting itself up as an object to be worshipped, which is why
Mm-hmm.
Pascal's observation that there's no real atheistic option out there. You just get Christianity or idolatry. So you get
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
worship of the state, and liberalism just becomes a theocracy itself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's certainly has now.
With the self as a god. Liberalism has its god, it's just a different one.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he says that a people that does not profess the true religion cannot durably practice all the commandments. Some people will say things like, yeah, I like the 10 Commandments, but not all that religion stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. This is I don't know, some sort of appeal to like the instrumental elements, the instrumental vestiges of Christianity to, yeah, sure, we need some sort of coordinating system to get our laws in line with. And that Ten Commandments, that'll do. But it's, yeah, it doesn't go any further as to, well, what undergirds or underpins, like why does that instrumentality work over something else? You know,
Yeah,
if the
right.
world's completely arbitrary, then why should like a Christian shaped like puzzle piece fit into what's instrumentally good? Like that's really odd how that turns out.
And what he's saying here too is that man cannot by his own power, keep even the natural law, let alone supernatural law. So we need grace to help us. And if you're not getting the sacraments, 4 of the 7 of which give light to the intellect and make doing good come more naturally to us, you're not going to be able to meet the standard that God sets because of original sin. So when people say, I like the 10 Commandments, but not religion, you're basically saying, I can see those are good goals, but I don't want God to help me meet them. And you're always going to fall short of them. And the other thing is that religion just is the clarification and God's revelation of what natural law is. So if you think there's something important about honoring your parents, for example, or doing good, and you appreciate that there's a right and a wrong way to live a human life, well, the 10 Commandments are just described by the church as a privileged expression of natural law. God saying, here it is, summed up in 10 points, what I want you to do. And if you're on board with this, I will help you do it. So you can do it better than you ever could by your own power, as long as you consent to my help.
Yep. So
pride in breeding hatred against any kind of authority induces a clearly liberal attitude. Hopefully, from our rundown of all the ways in which this manifests itself at the start of the stream, people can see the link here. But this is it in essence. We need humility to be able to ask for the help that we need to live good lives. And the kind of person who would like to describe himself as spiritual, for example, but not religious, or likes the idea of being able to just piece together his own religion and not needing any kind of priestly authority or not submitting to the teaching of the church. That's a form of pride, and it's what started the Reformation.
Yep.
Oh, this is a good one. Order is heaven's first law. Alexander Pope.
I like that. Yeah.
And what we get in people characterized mainly by pride, according to Jolivera, and this was seen mainly in the 60s with the Summer of Love, is a frame of mind characterized by the spontaneity of the primary reactions. Let me just say a bit more about what he means by that. He says that the revolutionary process in souls, as herein described, produced in the most recent generations, and especially in adolescents of our days who hypnotized themselves with rock and roll. A frame of mind characterized by the spontaneity of the primary reactions. So this is mainly about living on impulse. And he's right there to talk about the importance of music, because Plato said that music can work its way into the soul and affect the passions more than anything else.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something in my older years I've really been much more on guard about now. I never used to think that it was that important, but it really is.
Yeah, and if only he could see how much worse things have got than rock and roll, with MTV-based music videos and twerking, what you see on TikTok for 2 seconds if you open the app. So he says later in the book that someone who managed to control what was on television, on the radio, etc., would have done more for the counter-revolution than someone who, in the ordinary course of government, managed to, bring down a left-wing cabinet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is I don't know who, I attribute it to Andrew Breitbart, but the idea of politics being downstream from culture. So if you can get a hold of cultural production, particularly music and visual stimulation, then that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, much more than certain policies.
It's certainly important, but I'm not convinced that politics is fundamentally downstream from culture, because if you look at the way that the laws were changed to get porn on the big screens in the first place, you see it initiated there first. So they
Hmm.
work behind the scenes to change the laws top down to be able to bring these new things into the culture. So
Hmm.
I think fundamentally you've got political and legal battles before we see some of the big cultural changes. And
Yep.
yet, the Amish, for example, show how much can be done by resisting that culture, making the necessary sacrifices to do so.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's a great example.
Now, the destruction is almost complete today. He doesn't mince words about this. The destruction of the disposition of men and things according to the doctrine of the church, the teacher of revelation and natural law, is almost complete today.
Mm.
I've got a few thoughts about this to finish on. What do you think about it? Almost complete. We're 5 minutes to midnight.
I mean, I think it's horrifying that he was saying that back in 1959, and to think, well, where? I mean, what would he say about now? I mean, um, yeah, it's. You have to wonder how much gas is left in the tank at this point. You know, we're really West is really running on fumes if he was saying that back in 1959.
You scared by this? What's your immediate reaction? You worried, pessimistic, hopeful? Some people hearing that would be scared. There's no point.
Right? Yeah. I mean, to be honest, probably a mix of um, emotions. You know, I mean, ultimately, this Christ is already victorious, so we don't have to worry about that falling, and really, it's just a matter of sorting our own lives out so that we can take part in that triumph as well. But I do think, as we talked about in CMAS last week, some type of chastisement is going to be coming, and for the most part, we've got ourselves into this. So I think that chastisement is necessary to bring people back to orienting God as the centerpiece of their lives, and not having all these other things and vicious dispositions taking us away from them.
Mm, I think that's a
So I
sensible.
think it's ultimately good. It's ultimately good that we you have to be corrected.
Yeah, I think that's a sensible way to see it. The Psalms, in particular, are full of pride being humbled through suffering and that being just. And
Mm.
I would recommend that people read Romans 1, looking at how God basically says, fine, have it your way. If you don't want to do it my way, do it your way, and the consequences will follow. So it's about pride being humbled one way or another. And some people just don't want to do it God's way at all. So the line is
Mm.
that they are given over to a reprobate mind, and their intellects are allowed to become darker and darker.
Mm.
It doesn't work in the long run. You can't set up any alternative order, as de Oliveira says. So you know that collapse is coming. It's just a matter of when rather than if.
Right.
And the advantage that Christians have got is that we know that life isn't supposed to be about just happiness and fun times. We're created to be happy with God in the next life. And this life is largely about suffering having a purifying effect on us. So, unlike liberalism, which can break relatively easily when suffering comes in, because it's all supposed to be about happiness and heaven on earth,
Mm.
Christians know that, in a sense, we're like the fish who swim in the waters of suffering. So it's our element.
Mm. Yeah, agreed.
Right. The destruction then is part of God's plan, because when we see it falling out around us, what alternative do we expect? If people deviate from the church's teaching, we'd expect to see chaos and disaster. And
Mm.
yet we also see the church has upheld its teaching in all these vital areas because it can't teach error. Now, if it could teach error, it certainly would have done throughout human history, just like any other merely human institution. But the point is that it can't, and the doctrine is still there, despite all the attacks on it, for us to follow and be led out of the darkness by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, truth is truth. It's not. I mean, that's something that we can be. It could be it can't budge.
Any final advice then to people? Because I think this comes up a lot. The idea that it seems pointless because there's so much stacked against the Christian view of things.
I would just say, I mean, we've talked about this on CMask as well. I mean, there's been so many times where the church has looked like it's been down and out, and there's been a revival. This happened so many times before, so I think that should speak to the durability and underneath that the truth of the church and of its teachings. So I think that looking at the historical precedent should give one some solace, some peace of mind, and getting back to that, like C.S. Lewis quote where he talks about living in the age of the bomb, where he says, like, look, how should I live in the nuclear age? Should I be like cowering in a bomb shelter? Should I, stop doing human things? Should I stop having human connections? It's like, no, just be a person, do human things, do human things, love your friends, love your neighbors, be grateful of things. And if a bomb's coming, if some chastisement's coming, then when it lands, let it find you be doing human things.
Yeah, that's the best response. I've just managed to dig up that Romans 1 verse I was thinking about. Romans 1:22, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And then Augustine comments, it is pride that turns man away from wisdom, and folly is the consequence of turning away from wisdom. And that's pretty much what Oliveira has been saying in a sentence. Pride turns man away from wisdom. Folly is the consequence of turning away from wisdom. And what is, pregnant men, if not folly? And St. John Chrysostom comments that not enduring to go the way which God had commanded them, they were plunged into the reasonings of senselessness. I think that is another great commentary on our times as well. And becoming so darkened that you don't even realize you're not making sense anymore.
Yeah. You got to keep doubling down on the pride. And it's very humbling to back off on that.
And it's full of the idea that God deliberately gives people over to illusions because that's what they have asked for. Augustine says that when the evil will receives power to accomplish its purpose, this comes from the judgment of God.
Yeah. Sounds right.
Good. So next time then, we'll do the next 3 chapters, 10, 11, 12, and then that'll be the whole book done. If you've enjoyed today's stream, go back and have a look at the previous 2, if you missed those, chapters 1 to 3 and then 4 to 6, where some of what we talked about today was set out from a different angle. But today's been a good recap of that material. Looking forward to next time and finishing the book.
Yep, same here. Sounds
great.
Good.
I'll see you on Friday for CMask. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, guys.